On our way back from Faroe to Shetland, we decided to take the Swan in past Suðuroy, the most southerly of the Faroese Islands. After a few hours sailing, we had tied up in the attractive harbour of Tvøroyri. With a population of about 1,500, it's still a prosperous place, although not as important as it was in the 19th century, when it was one of the main fishing ports in Faroe. Later that day, a few of us went for a stroll through the village. As we walked, we began to talk about the first Shetlanders who came to Faroe to fish. We wondered if some of these cod fishermen, maybe even some of our own ancestors, had walked these same streets more than 100 years ago. Making our way back to the boat, we saw the rest of the crew sitting inside a bar called Pubbin in what had once been the Thompson Merchant Store, one of the old cod companies in the village. As we joined them, I noticed that our skipper, Magni Sinclair, was not there. Someone explained he had stayed on board to hear the latest shipping forecast. Looking around the pub, I could see there was an eclectic collection of all kinds of things on the shelves and tables. I realised that all of this, the glass jars, the old tobacco tins, the brandy pigs and the fishing gear, had once been for sale. This is not a pub trying to look old. This is a merchant store that now sells alcohol and food, and has not seen of any need to clear away the evidence of its previous life. When we had settled down to enjoy our beer, the lady behind the bar came across to ask if we were from Shetland. She had seen the flag on the boat. Dressed in faded Levi's and a baggy Faroese jumper, she introduced herself with a welcoming smile as Anna Kirsten Thompson, the owner of Pubbin. Short and slim, with cropped auburn hair, she was both energetic and enthusiastic. She told us that she had been brought up with stories of the Shetland fishermen who used to fish around Faroe. Many of them were regular visitors to Tvøroyri, and they were all well known to her family when they ran the merchant business. She told us there were company records which showed which Shetlanders had come into the shop and what they had bought. It was mostly brandy and tobacco, she added with an impish grin. I asked if these records were stored in the archives in Tórshavn or Copenhagen. She just laughed and asked me to follow her next door. We went into a room that had once been an office, and there, lying on an old table, were company ledgers detailing all the transactions that took place. Although all the entries were in Danish, it was easy to read which Shetlanders had bought what, when, and at what price. Just as I was starting to look through the documents, I overheard Magni shout in the door that he had just heard that a gale was forecast for tomorrow and we would be best to leave now. So having just discovered this treasure trove of information about the Shetland cod fishermen, I had to leave them unread. It would be 4 years before I came back. I barely had time to finish my beer. When I eventually found my way back to Tvøroyri and began to read the ledgers, I was astonished. The scale of the purchases were staggering. Many Shetlanders regularly purchased huge quantities of brandy and tobacco. In 1863, John Williamson of the Petrel bought brandy to the value of over £17, while Ross Georgeson, skipper of the Caroline, spent more than £21. At this time, the average annual wage for a cod fisherman was around £18. Other purchases were more modest, ranging from £3 to £10 in value, mostly for brandy, but also tobacco and occasionally items of clothing. One entry that caught my eye was in April 1864, when William Goodlad bought brandy and 3 woolen jumpers for the comparatively small sum of £1.65. He was one of my ancestors and was aged 19 at the time. He was drowned 8 years later when his smack, the turquoise, was lost on our way back from Faroe. As I sat at this old desk, examining these precious ledgers, I noticed the dust particles in the atmosphere were sparkling in a shaft of bright sunlight that had suddenly found its way in through the shuttered window. As this short glimpse of sun disappeared, I became aware of how beautiful the copperplate handwriting was. Nobody writes like this anymore. It was entirely legible, but much more than utilitarian. The graceful lines and bold capitals spoke of a confident merchant recording his daily business in a manner that was pleasing to the eye. Looking around at the worn wooden floor, the faded paint on the pine-lined walls, it occurred to me that little had changed in this room since Anna Kirsten's ancestors had sold brandy to mine.